It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance coming to you from our Sacramento bureau. We are joined by Marty Block. He is a member of the California State Senate, but you should know he was a professor at San Diego State, a dean at San Diego State, and 8 years on the San Diego Community College District, which is why I'm not surprised you have proposed the following bill. It deals with community colleges and whether these institutions should be permitted to offer four-year degrees. Wow.
Right. It's something that's already done in 21 other states. And this is really responsive to President Obama's State of the Union last year, where he called for, he talked about a gap we have in skills training, that we need people who can fill jobs that are out there right now.
But let's back up, if I may,
sure.
Because I was aware that you proposed a very similar bill a few years ago, and the bill didn't get much traction. I'm wondering why it happened that way then and why now you seem to be building momentum.
Yeah, a few things have happened since then. First of all, the main difference is the budget. Back then we had a huge deficit. Now we do have a slight surplus, and we can start to reinvest in programs that we had to cut before, and also start adding new programs that'll help us.
But is there a significant cost to have four-year degrees? I mean, presumably the students would pay their fee, but
yeah, it's actually very cost effective, but there would be a startup cost. We need to buy equipment for new programs in the colleges. We need to hire some new faculty. So while students would ultimately be able to pay the burden, basically carry the cost to be self-sufficient, at first there would be a startup.
And would the costs be the same as they are now? You know, right now, $46 a unit to go to community college. Obviously more at CSU and UC, but they're getting the four-year degrees. So if you do matriculate into a four-year program at community college, does your bill presume increased cost?
Yes, the plan would be that for the first 2 years, the students would pay the same and take the same courses as other two-year students. But instead of transferring to a four-year institution, they do the second 2 years at the same campus where they're already comfortable, where they know the faculty, where they live nearby. So they're much more likely to persist and actually finish a four-year degree. And we'd be offering degrees only where there's a demonstrated workforce need. So they go straight from the four-year program into the workforce.
And the fee for those last 2 years?
It would be more than what they pay in the first 2 years, less than what CSU charges right now.
And that's obviously the key. I mean, part of the reason why there's so much noise around this in the best sense is that, look, $6,000 a year at CSU, and that's just tuition and fees, is a nice chunk of change. UC, $12,000. You know, and you got to live on campus often because you're not near home, and so if you can do this near home, that's where we see the cost savings.
Right. Community colleges have shown they can be more cost effective and really do just as good a job.
At the same time, I've spoken with some community college trustees. Some are very excited about the possibilities. Others aren't sure. And the reason they are not sure is because what they say is, think about the master plan. You know, the master plan really talks about community colleges having a certain mission, CSU having another mission, and UC having a third mission. So it changes the mission. What's your sense?
Yeah, the master plan was great for 1960. It has changed over the years. The UC used to be the only one that could offer standalone doctoral degrees.
Right.
Several years ago, the CSU was given that right because it was seen that there was a need for more doctoral degrees being offered. So the CSU has already violated, if you will, the mission plan. The community colleges, clearly, we need to have 60,000 more bachelor's degrees every year between now and 2025 just to keep up with the demand. The CSU can't produce those 60,000. So what we have now, we have students going to private for-profit schools, some of which are good, many of which aren't. And they're paying $40,000 a year for these degrees, questionable degrees. We can do it at community colleges, a better degree for less money.
Okay, when we come back, sir, I want to continue our conversation about community colleges. Talk about what types of degrees will be offered in terms of the focus, the course. Will it be all areas or just some? For our viewers on HLN, we thank Marty Block for joining us, a member of the California State Senate. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's continue the conversation and speak about the areas of study. Because obviously there are certain areas where CSU may have expertise, where UC may have expertise. What does the bill say in terms of what coursework will be offered in terms of bachelor degrees?
There are a couple of qualifications in determining the coursework. First of all, it can't be duplicative of something already offered at the CSU or UC.
Okay.
So it won't be philosophy or English or history, degrees that have questionable value on the market right now.
Well, that's another conversation, but be that as it may. Did President Obama get in trouble for questioning art history degrees?
Yes, he did.
We'll just let that go. Keep going.
What they will be are degrees that the local workforce investment boards say are needed in
WIB?
a local area. Right,
WIB,
right.
I knew that.
Yeah, very good.
Right.
And they'll be consulted in each area. Each community will have its own degree. It will offer a degree or degrees. And it will be one where, theoretically at least, once a student graduates, there will be a job waiting.
Right. So what degrees do you see are in most demand that would fall out of the CSU-UC purview?
Well, it depends on the location. Some areas need more healthcare professionals. We're told that in respiratory therapy, for example, folks are looking now for bachelor's degrees. Some areas need public safety folks, and while a lot of two-year colleges, community colleges provide training to be a firefighter or a police officer, they don't provide managers with that training. So an extra 2 years will be a bachelor's degree in public safety management. In some areas, it's auto technology.
Right.
Used to be auto shop when I was in high school.
Right, you would be both.
It became auto technology because now there are computers on board, and to manage auto technology departments requires a bachelor's degree.
I want to ask about the faculty, though, at
Sure.
community colleges. God bless them. Incredibly gifted and talented, many with PhDs, but many not. And so the question is, will community colleges need to hire new faculty? Will there be standards that will be set? Because I believe at CSU and UC you need to be a PhD. Is that true? Or can you be a master's at CSU but not UC?
In most courses, most disciplines, you need to have a PhD.
Okay.
Not all.
Okay.
But in fact, in many of the courses are being taught by graduate assistants.
Well
especially
stated.
at
Yeah,
UC.
that's a good point. But what will happen though? Because when you go to a community college, they could be adjuncts. With only a bachelor's for that matter.
Well, no, most community colleges do require master's
They do
degrees.
even for adjuncts.
Yeah.
Okay, but be that as it may.
in most areas.
Yeah, be that as it
Now, for the first 2 years, the lower division courses, those are already being taught by community college faculty, and we've seen clear indications that students who do their first 2 years at a community college and transfer to a UC or CSU do just as well as those who start at the CSU, maybe better.
And our director has told us she enjoyed, for example, our community college courses more. She felt more engaged. She felt like she could be more hands-on.
Right.
Whereas at these large UCs and CSUs, again, no criticism intended, you get the graduate system.
Right, and we'll have full faculty teaching each of the courses, and there will be more theory. It'll be less hands-on in the second 2 years. That's really the pattern of education.
Right.
But students have the benefit of both. And the main thing is students will finish. They won't have to transfer 45 miles away or 400 miles away. They can go to the same school with the faculty they know, with the students they're comfortable with, don't have to leave their job, don't have to leave their family, and they'll be training only for careers where there are jobs available today.
So as I understand your bill, it would be a pilot program
Correct.
set up for 8 years. Do we have a sense as to which institutions would be permitted? Right now, I believe we have 78 community colleges. Is that right?
72 districts, 112 colleges.
There you got it. 72 districts, 112 colleges. Thank you for the correction. So would all of the institutions be permitted to participate?
Well, there's one statewide chancellor, and the decision would probably be left with the chancellor and the community college statewide board of governors to decide how many schools make sense, in consultation with the legislature, in consultation with workforce people.
I think his name is Bryce Harris. I know he's very excited about this possibility. They are studying this possibility right now. I'm sure you know that. And so as we march forward, are you looking at other states as models? I know, for example, Michigan recently adopted a program allowing backs in limited fields. And so there are several states that allow it.
There are 21 other states
Right.
that allow this. There are more than 450 degree programs already. So it's not like we're going into uncharted territory. We know this works. We just need to empower community colleges to offer the degrees.
So where do we go from here? What's the life of this bill? What happens next?
But we're just starting out the legislative year.
Right.
We have 2 or 3 committees in the Senate we have to get through.
see.
Education committee will be the first
course.
stop. If we get through the committees, we go to the Senate floor. If we pass off the floor, same process in the Assembly. And then the bill goes to the governor in
See what
September or
happens.
October.
His name is Marty Block. He is a member of the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is California Edition.
In what year did California pass its master plan for higher education? 1960, 62, 64, or 1966? California passed its master plan for higher education in 1960.
This is California Edition coming to you from Sacramento. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Lorena Gonzalez. She is a member of the California State Assembly, and I want to speak with you about workers. We know that workers have faced challenges over the last few decades. The union movement has faced some challenges. But that being said, there still are efforts to protect workers, especially those that may be on the lower end of the employment scale. Talk to us about your bill, AB 1522.
What my bill tries to do is provide earned sick days for workers who, primarily hourly workers who are low-wage workers, who right now don't have a single hour of sick leave available to them, literally an hour. And so there are about 6 million Californians we think that this would affect. And what it would do is basically they'd have to be at a location working for 90 days before they could use any of the sick time. But for every 30 hours of work, they could earn up to an hour of sick leave. And that way, with the maximum being 3 days for the year. And that way, if they get sick, obviously during this flu season, we know that a lot of people are going to work sick, unfortunately. But if they got sick, they could actually take a day off. Or if their child or maybe an elderly parent got sick, they could take the day off to take them to the doctor.
So it's also family leave at a certain level?
Well, it's sick leave for the individual worker or for direct family members.
And so talk to us about what you're hearing from your friends in the business community, because I have to think there's some divided views on this.
Well, it's interesting, everybody's a little nervous.
Right.
But I think it's also hard to argue with. It's a very limited proposal. It's been passed, sick days have been passed in Connecticut. They've had them in San Francisco for years. New York City just amended their sick leave time. So it's not unheard of. And it hasn't caused any kind of catastrophic business failure as a result. And we introduced 3 days. We said we'd be happy to talk to the business community. Most of what we're hearing from is small business and saying, is there going to be an exemption? And that's,
is there?
That part of the process of putting a bill through. I would like to say no. I'd like to say everybody could probably provide up to 3 days of earned sick leave.
But it's a negotiation, as you know.
Life is a negotiation, right? But we are committed to the 3 days and to ensure. And the interesting thing is this week, in fact, met with the Neighborhood Market Association, which represents small markets, and they said they love this bill. They love this bill, but of course they also want to talk about, what the size of a business should provide.
What about the question of negotiated contracts with unions? Because I have to think that some unions have negotiated on this point. How will this bill be impacted?
Well, it won't be. People that have collective bargaining agreements will be taken out of the equation. I don't know a single collective bargaining agreement that doesn't provide for at least 3 days of paid leave. So they just are not affected by this sort of state law, and they deal with any provisions that don't match up correctly in a different form than we do without collective bargaining agreements. And
then what about domestic workers?
Well, domestic workers, some are under a collective bargaining agreement. So those who are under a collective bargaining agreement would not be affected. They would be opted out. The ones who are not, and there are very few counties left where they're not, would be affected.
And then the big question is enforcement.
Right.
How does a bill like this get enforced?
Well, that's one of the things that we're going to have to work out. Obviously, it's up to workers to understand their rights and to be able to apply them the same way that they do for the minimum wage and for some other laws that we have in California. So we foresee that it would be no different than the minimum wage.
And have you seen enforcement work, for example, through minimum wage, which I want to talk about, by the way?
By and far, I think most businesses try to do the right thing, and they uphold the law. So we don't see that there's huge problems. Where we have seen problems with minimum wage and enforcement basically have been usually with immigrant workers, that where an employer knows that, number one, they're already breaking the law by hiring people, and they know that they're in a vulnerable position.
For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back with Lorena Gonzalez. So, Assemblywoman, I want to talk to you more about the minimum wage, because as you know, the minimum wage has become a hot button issue throughout California as well as the nation. So California recently passed a minimum wage increase to the applause of many, to the concern of some. What's your sense of California's minimum wage increase?
I think it's great that we passed a minimum wage increase. It's set to be the highest in the nation, but I have to be honest, I don't think it's high enough. And so if you look at historically wages and how they've kept up basically to the growth in the economy. They just haven't at the lower end. And we're set in a situation where our lowest wage workers could be working, 40 or 50 hours a week and still have to rely on public service basically or public assistance to get by. And so I think, we're to a point where we have to start looking at, do the taxpayers subsidize big corporations and big businesses that aren't willing to pay enough that their workers can live, or do we demand a little bit more?
It's interesting you set up that dichotomy, because what some businesses are saying is that if you increase the minimum wage, we're going to have to lay off workers.
Well, there's obviously different, you can get an economist to say either
of
side
course
of
you
this.
can,
so
right.
I'm not going to try to pull out.
But it's a valid, it's
a valid concern.
Right.
But what we do know is when you increase the minimum wage for our lowest wage workers, is that's money that gets recycled back into the economy.
Right. Economists have said that absolutely.
And it absolutely gets spent because this is it's a need. It's a need in order to eat, to have housing, to have clothes, and so it's a way that we know will increase the amount of economic activity going on in our state. So I think it's a net win.
The biggest opponents of minimum wage increase, restaurants. We hear their hue and cry. What can be done to try to bring, for proponents of increased minimum wage, bring that community into the fold and talk to them and explain to them? I'm sure you've had conversations with them.
Sure.
What can you tell them? I mean, how do we make it a win-win?
Well, when people have more money, they're going to eat out more. And so I think one of the things we have to look at is, yes, it's going to cost a little bit more, and maybe, your hamburger is going to be 5 cents or 10 cents more, but you're going to have more people coming through the door too. And I think we have to start looking at our state and our nation more collectively and stop, to be honest, stop bilking taxpayers for really all these, if you think about the number of programs that a minimum wage worker right now can rely upon that taxpayers are funding. They can get food stamps, they can get rental assistance, they can get Section 8 housing, they can get free and reduced lunch for their children, they get free transportation and bus passes.
So we're paying.
We're paying. So I'm paying, even though the restaurant owner doesn't want to pay.
Right.
And I think that we have to look at that and say what's fair, what's right, and there's dignity in work. People who work a full day's work and work a full week's work should be able to not have to rely on assistance.
It's interesting you say that. When Governor Brown pushed for the passage of the minimum wage ordinance last year, or law, he called it a moral responsibility. I mean, those are powerful words.
Well, I think so. And when you start to think about those of us who don't have to rely on a minimum wage, think about what it takes somebody who is working full time and doing their best to make ends meet and still having to rely on a handout. There's something wrong with how we value all work, if that's a situation.
What's interesting to me is there's a gentleman, we may remember him, his name is Ron Unz. He is a Republican. He is known for pushing for the elimination of bilingual education, and yet he is pushing for an initiative that would increase the minimum wage to $12 an hour.
Yep.
Who would have thunk it?
Well,
Who would have thunk it? What do you make of that, though? Because it is telling that Mr. Unz, who I guess comes from a libertarian bent, I mean, if anything, you'd think he'd be against it because that's the government kind of getting involved. What do you make of Mr. Unz's support?
Well, it was great to see it, to be honest. I came from organized labor, and
Right.
so a lot of the arguments he's using now are those that we've been using forever.
Sure.
It's that we don't need to subsidize big corporations or big companies with taxpayer benefits.
That's a libertarian view, right?
There is an idea that people who work should be able to provide for themselves, and that's all he's saying. It's pretty simple. And I always did think it was a conservative argument, so it doesn't surprise me completely that it's come out. It surprised me that it's taken this long for somebody else to be utilizing it.
We know President Obama is pushing for an increase in the minimum wage. It's a challenge. Where do you think we go nationally on the question?
Well, it is a challenge. I mean, California is in a much different place when we come to these kinds of issues than other parts. And when you realize that in Texas, that servers still make $2.35 an hour, $2.35 an hour, I believe is their actual wage, and they get tips, and they have to live on their tips basically.
Right. Oh, I see.
And you can imagine how difficult that would be to go from that to the 1010 that he's asking for.
Her name is Lorena Gonzalez, member of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is California Edition.
In what year did the United States first pass a federal minimum wage? 1931, 33, 38, or 1941?
Welcome to California Edition, coming to you from our Sacramento Bureau. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Steve Bradford, member of the California State Assembly. And sir, I want to speak with you about drones. They have been in the news a lot lately, especially as it relates to the ability of drones to spy on individuals. We know that drones have been used very effectively against foreign subjects and targets. But I presume, sir, there are drones flying around right above us as we speak.
Probably not.
Probably not?
No, but
Okay.
but they're being used, and we see a great potential for commercial use.
And let's talk about that. I heard Amazon say that maybe in 5 years our packages will be dropped off by drones. Let it be. Or not.
Or not, but we're hoping for more of a commercial application, both in forest fire prevention, some ag use, using it to irrigate fields and water fields. We also in like missing persons in rugged terrain where you can't access it by vehicle or foot. You're using drones to help rescue and spot missing people.
But at the same time, you are working with a few members, a Democrat and a Republican in the Assembly, to propose legislation focusing on the use of drones by governmental agencies.
Well, more of a commercial use again. AB 1327. I'm the co-author with Assemblyman Jeff Gorell.
Right.
And we really want the manufacturing of these vehicles to be in California. We think it's a great application. We think in the next 10 years there are going to be over 20,000 in airspace being used in some capacity. So we want to make sure those jobs stay here.
And so what does this bill do then specifically in terms of, is it a job creation bill or is it also a bill that looks to limit their use by the government, or both?
We're doing both.
Okay.
First, we want to stimulate the manufacturing of those. So hopefully we spur the commercial use, and by doing that, make sure that they're manufactured here in California.
Sure.
Also, we want to limit their use for law enforcement. We don't want these things to be Big Brother watching, spying on folks. That's not the intentions here. So.
But let's talk about that, because look, on the one hand, you know, this is America. We want to feel as if we're not being peeped upon by our government. But at the same time, it could be a very effective tool when it comes to crime eradication, crime enforcement. So where's the balance?
The bill here states that if law enforcement uses, they have to first get a warrant in order to use a drone.
Even if they're outside?
Well, it's only exception if they're like in hot pursuit of a crime that's taking place right then, and you can deploy one at that time for a hot pursuit situation. But other than that, they have to get a court order warrant in order to use
What
it.
have the DAs been saying about that? Have they come out?
Well, more ACLU, and they have voiced their concerns, and we've addressed that. We've amended the bill to make sure that any images that are captured that are not going to be used in a criminal prosecution of an individual must be destroyed after 6 months.
But it's interesting, you may know that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that anything that happens outside of the home is not necessarily protected by the Fourth Amendment. You can go into someone's trash. You can look through their window. If you have a drone flying around, if they're not peeping into a home and they're seeing activity on the outside, query whether they should need a search warrant.
Well, that's a good point, and that's what we're still working through.
Right,
as this
no,
bill
I
goes.
hear you,
Yeah.
I hear you. And so where do we stand? Obviously, this is, you know, 1968 Space Odyssey, and yet it's 2014. But, you know, where do we stand on this? Are you early in the process?
We're early. I mean, we just got it out of the Assembly floor. So it's
you
gonna
did?
Go, yeah, so it's going to go on the Senate. It was a 2-year bill.
Okay.
And it's moving along. And like you said, we spent the last year addressing some of those concerns about, again, how long you can hold an image if you capture it and how it's going to be used.
His name is Steve Bradford. He's a member of the California State Assembly. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back speaking about high-speed rail. So let's talk about high-speed rail, if we may. No doubt a very contentious issue. I know your friends on the Republican side are uniform against high-speed rail. Even your friend Gavin Newsom, the lieutenant governor, a Democrat, has come out against high-speed rail, a very big surprise for many. Where do you come down on high-speed rail?
I'm for high-speed rail if it makes sense as to the destination points of where you're trying to get to. Currently, the current route right now, I have some challenges with that, but I think there's great potential with high-speed rail. I just want to make sure that the money that we're spending gets us the product that is promised. We've seen back east where they've spent billions of dollars on a high-speed rail project. I forget the state. I think it might have been Vermont, and the overall mile per hour increase was only 20 miles per hour. That's not high-speed rail. So
you talk about where the high-speed rail goes and will go, and we can go on all day about why the decision was made to start in the Central Valley, but the decision was made to start in the Central Valley. And so that has caused some eyebrows to raise as to why we're starting there, but we have to start there. And so how does that play into your calculation?
Well, that's the biggest challenge, like I said, because I don't think it's a mad rush to get from Modesto to Fresno, so by high-speed rail. So I think a more common sense approach would have probably been like from Barstow to Las Vegas.
One could argue, or Barstow to LA.
Or Barstow to LA, without a doubt. So,
but federal funding is tied to starting in the Central Valley, and there are many court decisions that are percolating as we speak today. We know the California Supreme Court has ordered the Court of Appeal to expedite review of the decisions which were not favorable for the advocates of high-speed rail. The governor, though, he's standing firm at this stage, even though his lieutenant governor, independently elected, but the lieutenant governor has come out against it. Where do we go from here? It just seems as if we're kind of in an impasse. We have the court saying one thing, Governor Brown saying another. The federal government is wondering when the money's going to be spent in terms of matching funds. Where do we go?
We just met with the High Speed Rail Authority, and they laid out their plans. It's an aggressive program, without a doubt, and it's going to face a lot of challenges even going forward for those supporters of making sure, again, that the tie-in, you have the ACE line that's up in Northern California that has to be upgraded. The terrain and topography in those areas will not allow a train to move at that high rate of speed, even in those areas.
And to complicate matters, when you look at funding questions, the initiative says we're supposed to have, whenever we spend money, it needs to be clear where that source is. That's where the courts have had problems. But now Governor Brown has proposed that cap and trade dollars be used for high-speed rail. Cap and trade in itself is controversial. Then you add using those dollars for high-speed rail, which is also controversial. So you got this twin controversy brewing. What's happening on that front, if I may?
Personally, I'm not supporting that.
Really?
I think our residents here in California are paying enough, and to continue to have to add additional dollars when it's already been funded now to use this cap and trade money, which
it's supposed to go where?
It's supposed to be more for environmental projects and manufacturing and but I don't think, I know the nexus they're saying, hey, it's cleaning the air, reducing greenhouse gas and carbon. I see the nexus, but I wouldn't want to spend those dollars there. I think we'd have a better bang for our buck if we retrofit and improve some of the buildings and
we know that your Republican colleagues are itching to get back on the ballot the question of whether the high-speed rail should move forward. There have been initiative proposals in the legislature. I question whether they can get out, given that Republicans are in the minority. But polling does suggest that this public may have soured on high-speed rail. Given that, what happens next?
We're going to have to huddle up and figure this one out. There are some challenges here, but I think there's still a strong commitment to move forward to some degree with high-speed rail. I think there is a benefit in California.
Is there a middle ground? That's what I was wondering. I recently spoke with GOP leader Connie Conway about that, and it's hard to see what the middle ground is. Either we have it or we don't. Or maybe there is a middle ground.
I'm hoping there is, but when you have people like Kevin McCarthy, who's in the Congress, who part of that money is
number 3 leader
exactly in his district, and he says he doesn't want the money, then I say take the money and put it somewhere where we can use it.
We'll take it in LA, arguably.
Exactly, from LA to Orange County or LA to San Diego. I just then let us use that money and then let's start the project there.
Well, as you may know, Leader Conway has proposed changing the formulation of the 2008 bond to allow projects like that. Do you think that has any legs?
I would be interested in hearing further discussion on that.
What do you think the governor would say?
I don't know about what the governor would say, but I think the discussion needs to be had because, again, a lot of folks, they're anxious where it's starting and where it's ending, and I think we have some potentials.
His name is Steve Bradford. He is a member of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance, coming to you from Sacramento, and this is California Edition.